City in a Bottle is another card that's pretty interesting and is also dripping in history, so let's talk about it. City in a Bottle is a continuous artifact that costs 2 mana. Continuous is an obsolete term that basically just means it doesn't have an activated ability. All cards from Arabian Nights must be discarded from play, except for City in a Bottle. While City in a Bottle is in play, no further cards from Arabian Nights can be played. Okay, so if you don't know the history and the context of why this card exists, buckle up because it's going to be a bit of a trip. We have a lot to talk about, but we might as well start with the card effect. This card is both insanely powerful and so insanely niche you'd be pretty foolish to run it in most card pools. Like, what if they aren't playing any Arabian Nights cards? Well, then this card is really bad. But if they are playing Arabian Nights cards, then this card is very, very good. So let's give you some context. Arabian Nights was the first ever expansion set, and it has some very strong cards in it. Now, many of the powerful cards from this set have definitely fallen off, but if you're playing 93-94 old school, then these powerful cards have not fallen off. And the only reason you don't see them all the time is because there are very few printings and these cards are still desired, so they often range from like $400 to $3,000 per card. City in a Bottle is one of the most insane stacks pieces of all time, if it happens to be relevant. This card costs 2 mana, blows up some of the strongest cards in at least the old school format, and prevents your opponent from playing those busted cards until this gets removed. That's a lot of potential value for 2 mana, and this card definitely shows up in sideboards to deal with such threats as Juzam or Urnham, Serendib Ifrit and Guardian Beast, Flying Men and Kurdape, Drop of Honey and Library of Alexandria, Pyramids, and even City of Brass. Also Scheherazade if that's legal. So this card hits some of the best creatures in the format, and some of the best color fixing option if you're playing more than 2 colors, and overall just a surprisingly large share of the card pool's power. The point here is that this card is really good, but that doesn't tell us why the fuck a card like this even exists. It's kind of funny, but it's arguably not great game design to hose an entire set. So why the fuck did this card get made? Well, it got made because it was a very different time, and the preconceptions on what Magic the Gathering would be were very different than how it actually turned out to be. In my Bronze Tablet video, I spoke on how Richard assumed most people wouldn't own too many cards. City in a Bottle was also intended as a potential solution to a problem Richard thought might happen. In fact, this actually ties into another thing I've talked about briefly on other videos, and that's the infamous Arabian Nights card backs. If you've never heard of the Arabian Nights card back, they originally planned to use a different card back for Arabian Nights. Most of the images we have of these are pretty bad, but the card back did appear on the box, so this decision was changed super last minute. This was a divisive decision, and one of the main reasons they axed the idea was the feedback from the fans and people that heard about this idea was overwhelmingly negative. And it's easy to look at this idea and think it's incredibly stupid, and it often gets made fun of. I understand the sentiment, but with all due respect to anyone that's laughed at this or thought it was stupid, I think you might be missing some of the context that makes this decision, at least to me, a little bit more defensible. So one of the major concerns Richard had was keeping the game some level of balanced. He knew that the more cards you add to the environment, the more likely it is that something will break, and as the card pool grows, it becomes literally impossible to playtest every card against every card that ever existed. He was concerned about this, and that's the main reason Magic was initially going to reset itself. They were going to even change the name. Ice Age was in development, and at the time, the plan was to call it Magic the Ice Age, or Magic Ice Age, or something like that. So it would be the same game with like the same mechanics and everything, but it would be different pieces that weren't really meant to interact with each other, and that would have solved a lot of the balancing headaches that Magic still deals with today. Not to say that it would have been a perfect solution, but there was thought behind the decision. And on top of that, he was also concerned with players needing to opt out of the experience. At the time, the closest things to Magic were board games and stuff like D&D. Both of these kind of games have expansions and extra content, but the way those games work is kind of all the players have to agree before the game starts, right? Like when you bring out a board game and you bring out an expansion, everyone's kind of on the same page, and same is true with the D&D campaign. Like, okay, if you have this, we're playing with these books, not this one, kind of thing, right? Anyway, Richard was really worried that players wouldn't know where the cards came from, and that was a big deal to him because if somebody didn't like an expansion or a group of cards, he thought they should have the right to not play with or against those cards. In fact, the concept of the set symbol was actually a compromise to keep the backs the same. So, what does this have to do with City in a Bottle? Well, Richard was so concerned with players not having to play against cards that they did not want to play against that he made City in a Bottle, so they would have a tool to play out in order to prevent Arabian Nights cards from being played against them. That's kind of funny to me and really showcases just how different the game was thought of at the time. Also, this whole scenario is why the Arabian Night Mountain even got printed. They originally planned to put basic lands on the sheet because the cards were going to have a different back, and Richard didn't want your opponent to be able to narrow your card down based on the back, or at least he didn't want them to know if you drew a basic land or not. That's kind of a funny solution that still misses a large portion of the problem, but anyway. After the back thing changed, a bunch of the color separations failed, and they needed to redo all the quadrants with each sheet, other than the quadrant housing the lone basic mountain that made it into the packs. And at that point, they had, at like a work party or something, decided that having lands in the packs would be super lame and not cool, so they axed all of them, but the mountain made it in because of the issues behind the scenes. Arabian Nights is such an interesting set, and City in a Bottle might be the most interesting card in that set. It's a powerful card in the right metas, and probably even too strong, but it's so niche and such a weird idea. Oh yeah, City in a Bottle is also the only card in Arabian Nights that actually references the inspiration of the set. While the set takes place in the canon universe of 1001 Arabian Nights, or the real world, the actual inspiration to even make the set was from the comic book story Ramadan in The Sandman number 50. So that's pretty neat. Oh yeah, and going back to the Arabian Nights Mountain, it doesn't get sacrificed to City in a Bottle, because as the errata clears up, this card only hits cards first printed in Arabian Nights, and Mountain was a reprint. It also doesn't hit tokens created by cards from Arabian Nights, so your Bottle of Suleiman might be able to win you the game even after this comes down, assuming you remember to activate it in response. All this to say is that I do think the concept of this card was pretty admirable, and it might even be something that modern players resonate with. Has there been any sets recently that you wish you never had to deal with? It seems like that's becoming increasingly more common these days among players. But yeah, I guess I just kind of wanted to do the best I could to quash some of these misconceptions about these decisions because they are mostly lost to time. The pink back and set hoser cards seem terribly stupid by today's standards. And to be fair, they kinda are, but I do think they were pretty interesting ideas. But what do you, the viewer, think of all this shit? Had you ever even heard of the pink back? Do you think I'm crazy for defending any of this shit? How do you feel about set hosers? Have you ever seen this played? It's really fucking good. I mentioned to some of the cards this hits, but seriously, it's super fucking valuable to hit City of Brass. If that's the only thing you shut down, this card is a sinkhole that's easier to cast. Hitting Library of Alexandria is especially relevant, and hell, Bazaar of Baghdad is super busted in Vintage and like later card pools. So if that deck is meta, I don't think it's unreasonable to consider City in a Bottle. It's kind of crazy how efficient this card is. Anyway, I'm running out of steam, so let's check out the art. City in a Bottle was originally illustrated by Drew Tucker. This piece is sick as hell, and probably one of Drew's best works from the time. His early works had a particular style that some people love, but a lot of people don't. I do like his style, but it's definitely more hit or miss for me than most of the early art styles. City in a Bottle is a solid hit for me though. I really like this art. However, this isn't the only art we have to talk about. Despite it never being reprinted in a paper set, this did make it into Vintage Masters in Magic the Gathering Online. This version was illustrated by Daniel Lejergen. Hopefully I got close with that one. Anyway, this art is pretty sweet. I am a sucker for the classic arts, but I do really like this version as well. The details are really interesting, like the liquid kind of functioning as a sky. I don't know. I don't have much to say about this one, but I do think it is really well done. Anyway, I'm out of stuff to say, I guess, so we'll end the video here. I do encourage you to comment if you want to. You are also encouraged to like the video. If you liked it, you can subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thank you for watching.